Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Just in Time Cafe webinar. I'm Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe. I will be your moderator today, and today's webinar is titled Using Six Sigma to Amplify Diversity and Equity, and our guest host today is Joy Mason. Let me tell you a little bit about Joy. Joy is a successful business owner and a dynamic speaker from Indiana. Joy is a certified Six Sigma Black Belt strategist who worked at Eli Lilly for most of her career in quality leadership roles. After retiring in 2017, Joy established Optimist Business Solutions, a training and consulting firm that helps organizations optimize results by leveraging Six Sigma and lean strategies. She's currently applying organizational change management and continuous improvement strategies to help employees move from steps to strides with their DEI efforts. Welcome, Joy. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. You can ask questions anytime by entering them into the chat area. I'm going to monitor chat for Joy. There's also a question area, but we'll be using the chat area throughout the webinar. We welcome your participation. So when Joy asks questions, feel free to give us your thoughts. Videos of these webinars are all available on our website. We post them regularly on the Just in Time Cafe. They usually go up the Monday after the webinar. And our website again is jitcafe.com. You can check the webinar page for past webinars. Please join us in our first activity by sharing where you're from. Some of you have been chiming into the chat. You guys have registered from all over the world, and we love to know where you are right now. And when you type it in the chat, make sure you address it to everyone, not just us hosts and panelists, but everyone wants to hear from you. And let me take a look at, let's see who we've got. Oh boy, Joy, they are coming in. Let's see, let me come back. Whoa, things are happening. We've got Grace in Auburn, Arik in Seattle, Deandra from Indianapolis, and we've got Maria. We've got, let's see, yeah, and Deandra, that will be how you'll be greeted wherever you go. And we've got Sam in Vancouver. Welcome, Sam. We've got Jennifer in Charleston. We've got Sunitha in Cincinnati. Welcome, Sunitha. Sunitha will be on our January webinar, so do not miss Sunitha. Sally Toyster, sunny San Diego. Christopher Chapman, Chris from Indiana. Hello. Jana from Scottsdale, or Jana. Gary in Cleveland, Farah in San Diego, Diana in Carlsbad, Maria is from Indianapolis, Lola in Ottawa. Oh my goodness, and Emily, welcome Emily from Fishers. And yeah, and hello to all the pickleballers out there, the lean pickleball community. Okay, well that is a fabulous group of people. I am excited to get this rolling. So I am going to pass the baton over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm very excited because there's a combination of some of you that I do know, and then a lot of you that I don't know. My greatest hope is that you take away something different, maybe something that you haven't heard before, and you're going to hear this from me in that I'm not trying to persuade you, push you, convince you. This is simply another approach to consider. So thank you again for having me today, and we will get these slides moving. Okay, a workshop has to start with what are our goals, right? What are we trying to achieve? And so I broke this down into 3 simple goals. As I mentioned, I'm simply trying to present a different approach. I'm not trying to force you into anything, but hopefully you will walk away with something new to consider regarding your DE&I efforts. My goal is to change the conversation. We have had more than 30 years 30 to 40 years of more traditional D&I discussions where we talk about implicit bias training. We had book clubs, crucial conversations. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but we need to look at different approaches to assess how we can move the needle and move the needle more effectively. So I want to come alongside the traditional work that has been done with some of the approaches that I'm talking about today. But yes, I want to change the conversation. And I also want to present an approach that provides some encouragement and hope. There are many approaches to D&I, and there are many effective approaches, but with some of them, it's a very emotional topic, and it's hard to find hope and encouragement to feel like we can actually take steps forward. This is hard work. And so again, this is a different approach for you to consider. What we will go through today are, I want to talk about the assumptions that I'm coming into this workshop with regarding all of you, because I don't know all of you. So I have a set of assumptions. And just like a good researcher, my educational background is science. So you'll see this outline is kind of like how you would go about doing a study, where we're going to talk about what are the assumptions and what are the constraints of our time together. Right? Because we can't do everything. So I want to be right up front with what our constraints are. There's some context I want to provide. We should be aligned on definitions, so I'll cover just a few. I have an activity, one interactive activity where I want to hear what your thoughts are in the chat. I'll provide the equity roadmap, which I already said right up front, that equity roadmap is Six Sigma, and then we'll talk about next steps. Assumptions and constraints. Again, I don't know all of you, and you come from very different places. There's a lot of diversity just from who we have on the call today. And so my assumption then is there's probably a whole range of where you are on the continuum with your approach and thoughts and your past experiences when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm not going to make any assumptions that we're all like-minded here just because you're attending today. Constraints. There isn't enough time for me to persuade you of anything. Okay, so I'm not trying to do that. And again, what I want to try to do is bring any defensiveness that can come up, because again, this is very emotional for a lot of us, and it can feel very personal based on your experiences. And the minute you think somebody's trying to push you or persuade you, it's a very human, normal emotion to become defensive. And so I just want to kind of put you at ease. Again, I am presenting an approach for you to consider, and you may end the call and decide that's not for me. Perfectly fine. In our Lean Six Sigma world, I think some of us like this is not slides. I use them a lot because I try to think about what some of the things may be going on in your head, right? When you see your workshop title, there are things that come up before you even see the presenter, hear them speak in terms of what you think this is or is not, or what it will or will not be. What this is and what you will hear today with this Six Sigma approach to DE&I is a focus on processes, structures, and systems, because really that's where we're going to move the needle the most when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. What it is not is a discussion on individual biases. This is not about how can you have a better training program on diversity. And again, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but what I'd like to do is present a possibility where Lean Six Sigma and continuous improvement can come alongside the traditional work of D&I and amplify the historic efforts that we have seen in the past. Okay, we're going to have an activity here. I will present a word cloud to you, and I'm going to give you about 5 seconds to look at it. And then at the end of the 5 seconds, I'll switch off of the slide, And I want you to write in the chat, and Elizabeth will monitor it for me. What word do you remember? What words do you remember? And what feelings were coming up? Okay, what words do you remember? And what feelings were coming up? And you only have about 5 seconds before I switch off the slide. Okay. Okay, and that was 5 seconds. Share in the comment section what words you remember and what kind of feelings were coming up for you. And then we'll take a few seconds here to see what your thoughts are. I'm real curious.
Probably helpful if I speak without mute on, but.
Okay, they're coming in slowly.
Yeah.
Slow.
So you're getting, people are remembering, they're giving you the words. We probably are also looking for you're looking for the feelings that are going along with them, right?
Right, but I'm tracking. I pulled up the comments. I saw diversity, fairness, microaggression, Black Lives Matter, fairness, equality, diversity. And what's interesting about the people of color, Black Lives Matter, microaggressions has come up several times, micro and macro. Okay, feelings. What I have noticed every time I do this exercise, it's always the feelings. I have to remind everybody, tell me what you felt. I have to remind them.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something there. Okay. It makes me heartsick to see conversations repeating as if we are, oh, that went fast. Okay, I prefer the positive words, yes. And that's human to prefer the positive, yeah. Okay, I think it's always interesting out of a word cloud, what words actually stick with you, and also what feelings come up, because feelings are part of this. And here's where I'm going by inquiring about your feelings and what was going on internally here. And that is, we have different perspectives and biases. That's being human. Okay, that's the individual level of race, racism, any kind of ism, is that you have a perspective and a bias. Perspective is a way of thinking about or seeing something. Bias is an attitude that you have that makes you treat someone in a way that is unfair or different from the way you treat other people. We are all going to have different perspectives because we have different identities. And we go through life looking at things and experiences and events through the lens of our identities. With me being an introverted Black female who grew up in the city, I'm going to have a different perspective on events as opposed to a white male who grew up in rural Indiana. And I know we all want to be good people, right? We all, well, I'm assuming, right? I'm assuming we want to be good people. And so we don't want to admit that we may treat others differently based on our different perspectives. And with that perspectives comes attitudes. But I actually looked up cognitive biases because I found biases to be very interesting. Because it's kind of a study of psychology, and there are many psychology majors in my family. And there are over 200 cognitive biases that have been categorized. You can bet your bottom dollar you have a couple of them, okay? So we are human. We are not free from biases. And here's where I'm going. And I said this earlier, as an individual with different perspectives, attitudes, and identities, you're going to experience your environment different from others who have a different perspective, attitude, and identities. Now, for the sake of time, when you look at this graph here on the left, and this came from, this was actually from Pew Research. I didn't have it in the bottom here, but there was a survey that was sent out looking at how whites and Blacks differ widely in the views of how Blacks are treated. So in this shows a percent of whites and Blacks saying, in general, in our country these days, Blacks are treated less fairly than whites in each of the following situations. For the sake of time, I'm going to focus on one. When applying for a loan or mortgage, What this is saying is that Blacks are treated less fairly than whites. 38% of whites agree that Blacks are treated less fairly, compared to 74% of Blacks agree that Blacks are treated less fairly. This is an example of, I could look at that question and say, it's a fact. Just look it up. Look at all the banks. We've got several decades here of banks and institutions that have been found guilty and have been penalized financially for their discriminatory practices against Black and brown people. So if you were to ask me, I would say, it's a fact. Look it up. But it's not just the times that we're in. We have different perspectives based on your different attitudes, identities, and the experiences that you have had as you have lived your life. So while something is a fact to me, you will have a different lens and see something that is a fact to me. I am in that 74%, is not a fact to you because of your perspective. 38% for white people. So here's what, let me make sure I didn't skip a slide. Okay. Here's what I'd like to focus on today, and that is a roadmap or a framework by which we can possibly do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So Six Sigma, I think, can be a roadmap that can be effective. That roadmap, for those of us who were in the continuous improvement space, we know that Six Sigma roadmap is define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And I'm going to show today in the next 20 minutes here how that can be applied to D&I work. But I want you to pay attention to that last sentence there, that with this roadmap, it's based on processes and structures rather than individual perspectives and biases. It is my opinion that the training that is out there that we're doing, where we're focusing on people's perspectives and biases, I'm not saying that it's not needed, that it's not useful. I'm just saying it's a hard way to go. Because again, you're going off of people's experiences. They have been molded and shaped mentally, psychologically, neurologically based on those events. And to try to undo that or change that, let's face it, most of us trainers, we are not psychologists, we are not therapists, and we are not psychiatrists. That is very complex, difficult work where you have people's psyches and their emotions and their spirits in your hands, and that is very delicate, difficult work. And that is work that I choose not to get into that space. Where I think us in the continuous improvement professional field can make a difference is right here with approaches like Six Sigma that focus on systems and structures, and that's more aligned with our talent, our gifts, and our education. Here's a benefit of using a roadmap, and it really doesn't matter if it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or some other field. I actually did a financial literacy program landscape analysis for our local United Way here. And so I was looking at all the different nonprofit agencies that were doing financial literacy programming. And so I did research into best practices with that type of programming. And it came up again that when you use a roadmap or a framework for that type of training, you have better outputs and outcomes. So I want to apply it here with diversity, equity, inclusion, that if you use a roadmap, you have a framework and a strategy for approaching D&I that is focused, it's targeted, it's very thoughtful, methodical, and strategic. It's intentional. We're not kind of all over the place shooting darts just anywhere. It's intentional. And according to the research, again, I'm not making it up. When I research and read different studies, it is proposed that from different studies that using a framework, a research-backed framework, can be more impactful and more transformational. And I think Six Sigma aligns with that. So let's get right into it. Define is the first step of Six Sigma. And one, the number one is what I want you to remember by the time we end the session together, the number one. One problem, one demographic, one process. Too many times when I'm talking to people about D&I work, they're working on 20 different problems. We are more effective if we can be focused. How about we work on one problem, one demographic, one process? And let me share with you what that could look like. One demographic. I suggest dive into your data. And again, being in the continuous improvement field in Six Sigma, I'm a big fan of having some type of data, qualitative and quantitative data. Dig into it, disaggregate it, your data. And I'm not a statistician, okay, and I don't want to be, but I love how when you disaggregate the data is part of the story. It talks to you. And I know some of my friends here who are participating, like Deandra and others, we love a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are our love language. But the spreadsheet tells the story of people. And once you do it enough in practice, the story starts to jump off of the page. That's the beauty. So dive into your data, disaggregate the data, and the data should tell you where you should focus. Maybe it should be your Hispanic or Latino or your Asian Pacific Islander. But here's what I would like to suggest to you is that when I dig into the data, and when I look at several sources for to research different demographics and what the challenges are, most of the time across whatever sector, education, healthcare, social justice, you name it, it's your Black employees, Black students, Black patients, Black clients, Black citizens, and a lot of times it's our Black males that are on the bottom. I'm very thankful that Emily, I know who is with us, reached out to me and asked me, because I think she has seen this presentation before and asked me, where did I get that from? So this time I want to make sure that you have a source so you can look it up yourself. Like I told you, most of the concepts that I teach, I don't make it up. Okay, remember, I'm a science background, so I want to make sure there's research and there's data and studies behind what I share with you. So a good source, and what I shared yesterday, is the Brookings Institute report called The Challenge That Black Men Face. And the date on it, I think, is November 19th, 2020, November 2020. And then the link, the URL is on this page, so you can look it up yourself. And one process, focus on a process, not people. And that's what I mean by, I am not trying to fix you. I am not trying to fix anybody. If I tried, I'm sure I couldn't. And when I think that you're trying to fix me, I'm human. I will be defensive. And it's going to take a while for me to lower those defenses, and you will do the same thing. With Six Sigma, we're focused on processes. I think there's a Deming quote that says something about focusing on processes, not people, and focus on one process, not five. So I want to give you some examples. Again, one, please remember that when we're done, one. So, okay, so let's focus on process. What a good example is, we have a problem with the mentoring process that is adversely impacting Black males. The process is the mentoring process. What it is not is, on the right-hand side, we have a diversity problem. What can I do with that? That's not a process. I can't do anything. I can't move to any kind of action items or solutions with that kind of statement. That's not a process. We have a problem with Black males. Read that and think for a second. How does that sound? That sounds bad. You do not have a problem with Black males. You do not. Let's fix recruiting, mentoring, retention, and counseling for LGBTQIA+ and Latinx. I think there are about 4 or 5 processes in there. You won't be effective trying to focus on 5 things, 2 different communities. It's too much. It's not targeted. It's not focused. It's too much. Measure. Leverage data to tell the story. And the story is told in many different ways. With Six Sigma, early in the stages of DMAIC, You're doing your VOC work, your voice of the client, voice of the customer, where you need to go and talk to people and hear their story. That's the qualitative. And that I wish we had more time, but I can tell you stories where I had some biases in my mind, and just by chance, which it wasn't by chance, had a conversation with someone who had just left the Greenfield Pride Parade, wasn't planning on coming into contact with this person, had some biases as we were talking. And we sat there for, I don't know how long, and he told me his story. Oh gosh, it's invaluable to talk to people, go out to them and hear their story and learn. That's the qualitative part of it. And then of course, quantitative data is part of that story. Measure, once we have the data, well, let's go back. Once we have a process, we're targeted, we've got a demographic that we've selected, that the data, once we disaggregate the data, it pointed us in the direction that we needed to go. Now we can talk about doing some root cause analysis work. And there's a difference between root cause and causal factors. And we could do probably a whole workshop on root cause analysis and root cause versus causal factors. But what I can tell you quickly here is that when you tackle root causes, the issue doesn't return, it doesn't come back. When the issue keeps coming back after you have implemented some type of intervention, you probably only address causal factors, not root causes. And I'll give you one more tip. A root cause can't be that person's a jerk. Okay, the root cause can't go to people. So as I mentioned before, we're addressing structures and systems and processes. And so if you're coming down to so-and-so's a problem, you need to keep digging, maybe do a 5 whys or some other, a fishbone, do some other exercises to keep working down, getting down to the root cause. Otherwise, it'll keep coming back. A root cause is, here's some examples. What it is, they do not, here's an example, they do not have access to mentors to help them learn the spoken and unspoken norms of our school. Or we don't have a documented promotion process. I see that quite a bit, in that when it comes to like hiring or compensation or promotion within companies, when it's not documented, people who are on the outside because they're different, like Black and brown, then we lose out because we don't have the benefit of the relationships. We don't have the benefit of privilege. We aren't given the benefit of the doubt. And so without that documented process, there isn't that transparency, so we understand how it works. Is not, they don't want to stay. They aren't interested in STEM fields. They're just disengaged. They're a racist. This is a sexist place. I can't do anything with that. Those aren't root causes. Improve. We want to implement structural solutions based on data focused on root causes. And again, I've been doing training for a long, long time. 25 years or more. And the research will tell you that rarely is training the silver bullet or the panacea. So be very careful about when you do this work and then you come out of it and you say, we need training. That's the answer. Probably not. Most likely not. Maybe it's an intervention, but it needs to be combined with something else that addresses root causes. Again, with improve, if we go back, we're clear on a process. We've looked at the data. We've disaggregated the data. The data told us a story. We also went and heard the stories of those who are impacted. So that's the qualitative part that we can combine with the quantitative. We are doing root cause analysis so we can get down to root causes and go beyond the causal factors. We're ready to improve now based on a better foundation compared to if we didn't have a framework. With improve, what I recommend, and this is also taught when I got my Black Belt Six Sigma certification is that the ideal is in the Black Belt training from Purdue, it's called a C3 level. A C3 level intervention changes the design, changes the layout, changes the system, changes the policy, changes the standard. That's where we want to go. That's the sweet spot. It's not just a training program. We got to get to those policies. And diversity, equity, inclusion, even though it may seem like it, it is already woven into policy standards and systems, but the way it may be woven in now is exclusion. I think that's an important point. What is woven into a lot of policy standards and systems now is exclusion, not inclusion. But to a lot of our community, it's invisible. It's invisible when you're benefiting from it. But trust me, exclusion is built in there. So that's why we got to get to the policy standards and procedures with our interventions. Okay, we're almost towards the end here. The last step is control. And I will share with you that now this isn't easy, this framework. I think it's a very robust approach, but it's not easy because if any of these steps breaks down, the strategy breaks down. So between define, measure, analyze, improve, control, we have to be strong, robust, diligent, all in with each one of these steps, all the way down to control. Because if we fall down on control, we won't get the impact that we're looking for. With control, I tried to boil down some key concepts into the 4 M's. Monitor progress with metrics. And what's great, over the past year, I have seen more and more articles that talk about measuring, having some type of measures so we can see our progress over time. I remember where I used to work back in the late 80s. I don't recall seeing any metrics. We were only talking about diversity way back then, only diversity, and I don't recall metrics. But more entities are talking about it, and we must have metrics. If you go down to the bottom left, minimize your barriers. And don't just stay in a conference room trying to figure out what the barriers are. Remember, we talked about with Define and with Six Sigma, a central part of that in the early stages is go talk to people who are being impacted. They will tell you what the barriers are. You don't identify them in a conference room with your peers. You identify them by talking to the people who are impacted. They will tell you and validate maybe what you thought, but I almost guarantee you will learn something new. And it could be as much about how do we help overcome barriers as it is about some new process or a new intervention. Over on the right-hand side, the upper right, maintain clear accountability. Many of you have probably done RACIs, the RACI, and I have done many of those over the years. And what's interesting, there's a common theme that I see when I do these RACI charts with teams, and the A is missing. That is a common observation, that we have a lot of R's, so there are a lot of people feel they're responsible and they're doing something. But it's very common where we don't have that single point of accountability, where we have someone at the top that says the buck stops with me. And I am ultimately the one who ensures that we are doing this and following a process, and that we have measures and that we're moving the needle. Maintain clear accountability is essential. Maximize transparency. Some of the recent studies, I was starting to get really interested in transparency because somebody was doing a webinar here locally on transparency when it came to pay equity. And I thought, let me do a little research on that because I hadn't done a whole lot on transparency. There were a couple of, and I don't have the URL on this, but there were a couple of universities that were included in this study where it was recognized that there were inequities in pay across gender. And so they had a concerted effort to make the compensation policies and processes clear and transparent and accessible. And again, I don't remember the exact amount of time, maybe it was 18 months, I may be off. Within a certain amount of period, there was a 30% decrease in pay inequities between men and women. This is what I'm talking about. So while they may have had some implicit bias training going on and something focused on, what is the book? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And, we make it kind of funny and light, and we talk about the differences between men and women. So they may have been doing that training, but it's when you focus on systems, policies, standards, making the system and process transparent. When you combine that along with your traditional approaches, look how you can amplify the D&I work and help move the needle even further. I just thought that was really powerful, those studies that I read. So monitor with metrics, minimize the barriers for people who are traditionally excluded by the system. Maintain clear accountability. Again, this is very common from my experience. Accountability is missing, and that's a big piece of it, and maximize transparency. So here's our roadmap, Six Sigma, just to summarize it and review. And again, it's a possibility for you to consider. And that is define the problem. You don't have a diversity problem. Okay, I don't want to hear that. I can't do anything with that, and neither can you. You need to nail it down to what does the data say in terms of what demographic I need to focus on that is suffering the most. In other words, which house is on fire? I need to go to the house on the block that's on fire. The others may be at risk due to the weather conditions or whatever, but the house that's on fire, in other words, the demographic group that is suffering the most, that's where we need to target. Focus on a process. So it's a recruiting process, a selection process, it's a compensation process, it's a performance management process. A specific process is where we need to focus. Measure, qualitative, hear their stories. Quantitative as well. We need to analyze, do that root cause analysis and really dig in, go underneath the causal factors. And remember, if the problem keeps coming back, you were only tackling causal factors. Improve. We want to focus on policies and standards along with training that you may do. And with control, you need to monitor with metrics, maintain accountability, minimize barriers, and maximize. Okay, so I'll just leave you with a couple of tips. One problem, one process, one demographic. You can't do it all. Your time is limited, your resources are limited, your sanity, okay? Let's focus. And the best way to move the needle is just to bite off a little piece. So one demographic, one process, one problem. Use a roadmap. And maybe it's not Six Sigma, but if you use a framework, and again, the research says this, regardless of sector, that you can get more accomplished and you can be more targeted and more strategic and more effective if you follow a framework or roadmap. Fix processes, not people. People will always become defensive. So if you want to go down that road trying to fix people, good luck. It's a hard road to go. And focus on systems, standards. Okay, so I will end there. I was monitoring my clock here to make sure that I was okay with time. But I would like to suggest that as a result of listening to what you've heard today, that you think about, what is your next step? Look at what you're doing currently. And is there an opportunity to look at this framework and have this framework come alongside what you're doing currently to amplify the work? I'm not suggesting that you replace what you're doing. I don't know enough about what you're doing, but I do think this is a possible and a viable roadmap and framework to consider. Okay, that is it. And I've got my contact information there. If anyone wants to reach out to me, be more than happy to have a conversation. And now I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Just a quick question for you, Joy. Sam asked, he said, I feel like the vast majority of folks that attend these insightful and valuable conversations are on board with making movement on this. What are some small steps we can take to make inroads with leaders or others who are more resistant to this?
Well, I would suggest similar to, I think the resistance comes from you're trying to change me. I just, that's my personal view. People feel like they're being attacked. You're trying to change my perspectives. You're trying to tell me that who I am and how I've been is not okay. And that's a hard road to go. So this is an example of how to have a conversation, talking about a framework or an approach that's focused on processes rather than people. And so I think that's a viable way to go and have a conversation with a leader that they'd be open to.
Yeah. Back to Deming, fix the process, not the people. I'm curious. Oh, here's another one. Stephanie asked, if the problem identified is low representation of Black females in hiring, for example, what is an alternative to broadcasting, quote, I'm looking to hire a Black female in recruiting, or should we be that upfront?
That's a slippery slope. It's a matter of reaching out to, there are all kinds of networks here. Like here in Indianapolis, there's an Indianapolis chapter of the National Black MBA Association. They're a wonderful resource of diverse talent. There's also the YPs. So with the Indianapolis Urban League, we have the Exchange. And these are talented professionals, a diverse pool of people to choose from. And there, I know there's an accountant. There's I cannot think of it, but the board chair for the National Black something of accountants, he's here in Indianapolis. So a lot of times it's just, you just don't know the networks to reach out to. And so you need a partner who can help identify those networks for you.
That's a great one. And I feel that that's something that I've run into personally, that you don't realize you're accessing the same tributaries that have brought you a workforce that is not diverse. So why would you go back to the same sources? So I think expanding the sources sounds like, and you've got recommendations, which is wonderful. And you got a big thank you from Stephanie. I have a question for you. You talked about, I think about this a lot. You addressed kind of a universal problem with problem statements, which is people trying to solve multiple problems at once. But I loved your rule of 1-1-1. But I also am interested in what new measures have you seen come up in this, arena of applying Six Sigma and the structure of DMAIC to these problems? Because I feel like you're right. It started with, we have a diversity problem. Well, what exactly are we measuring? What process are we looking at?
That requires some reflection, but I will tell you the first thing that comes to mind, and it specifically comes to mind because of a program that I am running, and then having this learning from my own program, I'm starting to look out and see some commonalities with other programs. And that is, if we could have some metrics, some KPIs around supports. So many times our metrics are focused on the outputs, right? So many people, and again, I'm thinking about my own program where I wanted so many people trained and I wanted so many hours put in, and then a project will be completed. And so with Black and brown folks where there is a history of exclusion and not being exposed to the same resources, we need more supports. When you look at children who have been in a school, and I'm serious, this is real. I know sometimes it's hard to believe, but I was exposed a couple of years ago to a inner city high school And I was stunned that they didn't offer calculus. I was stunned, let me say that again, that they didn't offer calculus. I thought all schools, because I was in a suburban school, offered calculus. So when you take the Black high school graduate that is coming from the school who didn't have calculus, they're coming into college. And then you take the student who is coming from the high school who did have calculus, they're coming into a college. They need different supports. The one who didn't have calculus and is trying to go into a STEM field, they need more supports. So it's not just a matter of measuring the outputs. Can we put some KPI measures around supports for people who have not had equitable opportunities or exposure, so they are a little further behind? And so I am finding that with my own program. And again, when you're just going with the way we traditionally do things, that's something that wouldn't immediately come to mind, putting KPIs around supports for your cohort or your students or your patients or your clients. So that's the thing that comes to mind immediately.
That's great. And that kind of leads me into another question I have for you, having been immersed in this, and you mentioned two that occurred to me. One, you said different sources. So I think about that as a solution, right? One of the solutions is go to different sources. Here are some different sources. What are those? Another one was just what you said, measure, find out what supports are needed. And then do you see other examples of other solutions or countermeasures that you're seeing come up in this space? What comes to mind there?
A big one that comes to mind, excuse me, Elizabeth. A big one that comes to mind, because I am seeing this throughout our community, and that is partnerships. We cannot do this work alone, and you need many perspectives and you need diverse perspectives. So I am just really enjoying seeing different entities and businesses, hospitals and schools recognize that we need interdisciplinary, diverse partnerships to figure all this out. And that's something that I've always enjoyed in my career, is when you get a diverse team together, it's beautiful. It's like magic. The types of outcomes and ideas and innovation and creativity that comes when you get those diverse perspectives together on how to address something. In fact, the book called Diversity Bonus, that author, and I forget his name, but it's a very good book that talks about, I know we're talking, and I don't want to lose focus from racial diversity is very significant, and it's a big part of what we see going on in our country right now, but cognitive diversity and the bonus that comes out when you have different partners who have different thinking, but they're all committed towards the one goal. And there's some beautiful things that can come out of partnerships. So partnerships.
Great. Love it. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for it's interesting just hearing kind of where this goes. I'm interested in the different problem statements you're getting, the measures, the solutions. These are great. And root causes. Obviously, this is all great territory. So thank you so much, Joy. I gave them some links, but if you just switch to the next webinar banner, I can just give them a little information there. That it's Eric Olson, who's going to be, he's from East Coast Lean, and he's been running Lean Coffee every month, I think, for a few years now. And he's going to talk to us about Lean Coffee itself, and we're going to experiment here at the cafe. It's going to be a meeting and interactive, so I encourage you guys to come, where we're going to use this technique of sort of voting or multi-voting on, not East Coast Lean, it's Central Coast Lean. Thank you, Tracy. Central Coast Lean, Eric Olson, and we'll be experimenting using Lean Coffee to come up with Lean Coffee. And then the next thing is, I gave you guys a link. There's our latest podcast out, and that is, next slide, Joy, is Karen Ross on the Just in Time Cafe, talking about her new book, The Kind Leader. And that is a fascinating conversation. Kind leadership, kindness can be equated with weakness. And the day we recorded this, I think, is the day that Colin Powell passed away, who is the definition of a kind leader, an incredibly powerful kind leader. So check that out on the website. That's also, I put the link in there. You've got a couple of great comments here. You've got Sunitha saying her personal belief, when we focus on processes, perhaps the conversation can shift to the greatest good. And a thank you to you. Thank you from many folks for useful information. Great session today. Thanks, Joy. It was great to see everyone in the community. That was from our buddy Deandra. I like the statement focusing on the process, not people, since people become defensive. I think that's also a great takeaway in general, that we should always do that. Yana, thank you very much. Great timing for government agency addressing health equity and disparities. Great. Okay. It's been so fabulous having you, Joy. I am so excited that you came and you brought our roots to the problem, which is so great. Seeing Six Sigma applied this way is just gratifying.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate you, Elizabeth and Tracy. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll post this by Monday. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.